why there were so many non-votes for president in a precinct, a Trump person would raise a challenge and say you can't count that precinct because there's 2 votes off from the logbook. And again, you know, one is, even if it is off, you want to find out why it's off. Let's go through, you know, go through the cards, count the cards, look at them, right? And again, it was stopped. So what I saw in Michigan was Jim Crow voting. This is, you know, I mean, maybe the Russians are hacking, I don't know, but I can tell you this, that the GOP in Michigan doesn't need any help from Moscow to figure out how to fix an election. And I don't, you know, I'm not partisan on this. I don't have a dog in this race. And I have to say that I thought I was in Alabama. I just been in Alabama. I thought, in fact, in Alabama, it's not quite that bad. I mean, this was raw. This was raw.
Why won't the Justice Department get into this? Why won't they, you know, why won't they look into the abnormalities?
I guess you have to ask the Justice Department. We will be going to, after this, as we'll explain, we will be going to the Justice Department after this press conference. We've arranged to meet with them and deliver petitions. We'll explain that in a minute. Why they didn't act in this case, I mean, you'd have to ask the Justice Department. You know, we've had problems all over the country, no matter win or lose, and you know, it could have been, you know, I don't know. I have no idea.
It's very interesting. I hear what you're saying about the economic realities of Flint and Detroit in terms of the cities being bankrupt. But what strikes me very interesting about this, that there's a pattern that exists beyond Michigan, and that where the same things are happening, no matter, even if the county, even if the cities are not bankrupt. So one could discern a certain assault that has certain characteristics in certain communities.
Well, I'd like you to address that actually formally for the.
Okay.
That's this is Ruby Sales. We're going to bring her up in a minute. I'm just waiting for one more person so we can make sense of it.
I'll go to the elevator and see.
See if we got. What happened to Barbara? She said she was in the elevator. Where did she go? Tell her it's the. I think they listed as the Palast Asian American Crosscheck meeting. Yes.
Okay, so I'm here with a group called Voices of Millions with Coalition, and the question we have is, in the instance of this election, this cycle, we really are trying to ask another question, and that isn't a matter of who wins or loses. It's a matter of, do we allow an election to stand when there is ample evidence that there has been a foreign intrusion? So we don't want to get into the battle between, you know, the CIA and the FBI about who intruded and why did they intrude. Our question is, if they intruded, then should this election be allowed to stand? Because we know that an investigation, even if it is launched, will not bring any results until after the people are actually, until after the inauguration.
Well, this is a question about the Russian hacking. I'm not an expert on hacking or the Russians. The question is, should we allow the Electoral College to meet? Well, there's a question about whether foreign power has chosen our president. You know, for me at this hearing, there's two things. And by the way, it's none of the information I say that's going to come out tomorrow from my investigation in Michigan. That's all. It's not embargoed. Okay, so you can put it out or use it any way you wish. It's not embargoed. So I was just saying, thank you. We just part of our press conference, the great Barbara Ardenwine is here, and so I was just talking, Barbara, and we'll talk later about this, about what happened. I just came from my investigation in Detroit. I mean, I have a story on Democracy Now! Tomorrow about what happened in there. It's pretty horrific. And we didn't need the Russians to fix the election. Maybe they did or didn't. I have no idea because I haven't talked to Putin this week. But I can tell you that it was pretty ugly business in Detroit. So now I'll officially start this presser. My name is Greg Palast, and I am an investigative reporter working on the story of vote suppression for Rolling Stone magazine, and I just came back from Michigan, and I've been in Wisconsin and the other states investigating vote suppression, but there's one particular tactic that I revealed in a story in Rolling Stone in August 24 issue. It's a system called Crosscheck, interstate crosscheck. This system, interstate crosscheck, was created or is controlled by a man named Chris Kobach. He is the Secretary of State of Kansas. He is one of Trump's major supporters, and he is known for his, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, he's the counsel for and works with white supremacist organizations. But he is also in charge of the voting system of Kansas as Secretary of State. Now, you might say Kansas is not the swing state, but Mr. Kobach may be the swing Secretary of State, because what we found in the investigation for Rolling Stone, and also I worked for television for Al Jazeera, and we have a film out on it. What we found is that Mr. Kobach, in fact, I'll show this to you, what this is part of is Donald Trump's statement that millions of people are voting illegally. Millions of people should not be on the voter rolls. That the system is rigged, and he says people are why? And no one seems to ask the question, why does he say it's rigged? The answer is he says people are voting, quote, many, many times. He gets this from Chris Kobach, who says that there are people who are voting in 2 states at once. So James Brown votes in Georgia, and James Brown votes in Michigan. And so that's a federal crime. You go to prison.
And votes from the grave.
For 5 years if you do that. And so Chris Kobach has a system called interstate crosscheck where he got 30 Republican secretaries of state, voting chiefs of 30 Republican-controlled states, put those voter rolls together from those 30 states to find people who voted twice in the same election. Now, it's a strange business because, and if someone votes twice, as Chris Kobach says, it's very easy to find them. It's very obvious. You have the voter rolls, you have the addresses, it's very easy to find them and arrest them. However, Michigan, which is part of it, North Carolina, part of it, Pennsylvania, they've arrested exactly 0 people. Well, so maybe Kobach's list found no one. In fact, let me see if I can get the number for you. I can show this to anyone or send it to you. This is the list of cross-check states and the number of suspects for double voting, illegal double voting, or double registering in the 2012 election. And altogether, there are 7.2 million Americans who are suspected of voting or registering in 2 different states. The same person, a federal crime, a state crime. In Michigan, 449,022 people are on the double voter suspect list. Almost 500,000 Michiganders. Okay? In Pennsylvania, let's see if I can find Pennsylvania quickly. There are about 1/3 people suspected of voting or registering illegally twice. Now, if it were random, but they're arresting no one. What is going on with this list? How do they determine that so many people are voting twice? The answer is that, of course, they said they were matching names, middle names, social security numbers, dates of birth. Very cautious matches. So how do you get 7.2 million people on the list? Well, they said the list was confidential, state after state, because after all, to vote twice is a crime. is a crime. And therefore, the list of criminal suspects was confidential. My name is Greg Palast. I'm an investigative reporter. You write confidential, it's the first thing I look for, and I have the list. I have 2 million of the names on the list, including tens of thousands in Michigan, tens of thousands in Pennsylvania, where the states which supposedly chose our president. Now, to give you an idea of the accuracy of the list, I went to the Secretary of State of Michigan the day before yesterday. Donald Trump won the state of Michigan by 10,900 votes, they say. I just talked about some of the other problems of 74,000 votes uncounted, supposedly blank, of people supposedly voting by the thousands for 2 presidential candidates. I know Detroit schools are bad, but they're not that bad. Almost all of these bad votes, undercounts, overvotes, were in minority areas. Now, but you also had a problem of people who couldn't vote, showed up, and their names were missing from the voter rolls. Some filled out provisional ballots, which will not be counted. Most were just apparently turned away, or never got their voter cards, didn't show up. Who are these people? So I went to the Secretary of State who removed, and I said, so Donald Trump says there are voters who are voting twice. What are you doing about that? He says, oh, we've removed all these names that we got from interstate Crosscheck. We removed all these names. And I said, how many? They don't know, just a lot. And I said, how many were on the original list? He says, I don't know offhand. I said, I do. 449,000 Michiganders. How many removed? And do you know? And the system you use, he says, oh, we're very careful. Social security numbers and names. Well, let me read you some of these names. Some of these double voters, these ne'er-do-wells. I'm going to read you the names. This is from the Michigan list. This is just Michigan, people that supposedly voted or registered in Michigan and Georgia. This was just a random hit off this list, I kid you not. Georgia vote, Michael Lewis Brown voted in Georgia. Then he voted again in Michigan as Michael James Brown. Michael Bernard Brown voted again as Michael Anthony Brown. Michael Kelly Brown voted as Michael Wayne Brown. Michael Kendrick Brown. I'll give you these lists, by the way. Okay? And so on. Now, you might say that these are 2 voters, Michael Kendrick and Michael Wayne. They didn't. They sent them postcards. If they didn't return the postcards, they lost their vote. Now, who are these people? If it was a random people removed, it wouldn't affect this election or any election. Michael Brown. What is the color of brown voters? Name Brown. Okay, I think you know. I'll tell you, in Jackson, 53% of the people named Jackson are African American. Okay, the 93% of the people named Washington are African American. We aren't guessing because the Census Bureau provided our researchers with the racial breakdown of every surname in America. We are not guessing. This was overwhelming where you have, and in fact, on the suspect list, we had 1 in 7 African Americans in the 30 Republican states. In those swing states like Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania, 1 in 7 African Americans on that suspect list. Now, not all of them lost their vote. According to the state of Virginia, which gave us the hit, no, they won't tell us how many people they removed. Okay, only 1 state accidentally gave us the number, Virginia. They removed 12.1%. So we're looking nationwide in those 30 Republican states about, and Virginia used a conservative method. So if they all used the conservative Virginia method of removal, we would figure losing about 1.1 million voters. Okay, overwhelmingly voters of color. And in particular, and by the way, you would not be surprised to know that 96% of people named Garcia are Latino. I always wonder who the other 4% of Garcias that are not Latin, who are they? But okay.
Probably Spaniard and then
You know, they
Filipino.
don't like being listed as Latinos. So Garcia.
They're probably Filipino.
And Filipino, right. So we have Asian Pacific Islanders a lot. And so this is the type of group, and of course, as this is press conference being called by 18 with me by this was called by 18 Million Rising. I'll introduce our representative for 18 million, our spokesperson today in a minute. And there are 1 in 8 Asian Americans are on the suspect list in these states. So we have a brand new Jim Crow system, but it's not turning away voters of color with scary guys in white sheets. These are systems analysts with spreadsheets. This is lynching by laptop, and it can't be called anything else. And it may have elected our president. This is a very serious problem. And so, because of that, there was I should note that a member letter was written after he read the article in Rolling Stone by Congressman Alcee Hastings, the Dean of the Congressional Black Caucus, and the Honorable Keith Ellison, to Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General. But rather than waste a stamp or take the chance she wouldn't get it, I do know that Alcee Hastings, on the day after his 80th birthday, marched to the Justice Department and put my article and my information in the hands of Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, so to say to her, now you have it. You can't say you didn't get it. Please take action. Now, this was 2 months ago. This was before the election, asking her to take immediate action. Now, I do not know if action has been taken by the Justice Department that we don't publicly know about. It is an investigation. He also says, as a former federal judge, I can tell you this is a criminal conspiracy. This is a quote from Mr. Hastings, which you can use, from Congressman Hastings. I know criminal conspiracy when I see one, and this is it. And he expects and hopes for indictments of those who put together this list and put it in operation. We tried to speak to the Secretary of State, and again, their answers, once I showed them that I had the list, I showed them their Michigan, the names I just read to you, and suddenly the interview is over. So I went to the Attorney General of the state the day before yesterday, to his office in Lansing, who said he would meet with me never. And I said, wait, am I coming at an inconvenient time? He said, never. His spokesperson said to me when I came to his office, never, ever will we speak with you. So that's the status in Michigan, where so again, 449,000 people on the suspect list. We estimate that Rolling Stone, 50,000 Michiganders, give or take, were removed from those lists, predominantly African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans. And you tell me what that means for the presidential race. Pennsylvania, another slaughterhouse of Crosscheck victims. So we don't know, and they won't tell us, and they won't give us the list. They bury them, they stop us, they stop the information. So it requires really action by the Justice Department. Congressman Hastings' letter to Justice was turned into a petition and taken over by the Asian American activist group, 18 Million Rising, which, in coordination with the Daily Kos, gathered almost just about 30,000 signatures. On my site, another 20,000 signatures were gathered, and they are, so you see this pile here. So we have promised, so once we hit 50,000 signatures, to take these signatures to the Justice Department. Here they are. You can look at these also, and people have their comments on this random. Alf Sagan said, "It is simply ridiculous to rely only on the name of voters to identify and purge their votes." This is definitely a violation. Kevin Fricks, this is definitely a violation of people's rights. The chance of someone having the same name as somebody else in the country is far higher than the chance of a person is going to vote in 2 states. By the way, I did ask in Michigan if they had arrested anyone for voting twice, since, as Chris Kobach says, it's so easy to find these people, and he's found them. He gave them the list. And in Michigan they said, well, yes, we found some people, we've referred them for prosecution. I said, were they prosecuted? We don't know. I said, wait, you're removing thousands, tens of thousands of people from your voter rolls? And you've only referred a few, and you don't even know if they've been prosecuted. You don't even know if they've been convicted. I know the answer because I looked it up. 0. Okay? Barbara Clark, this is blatantly aimed at disenfranchising voters. It is wrong. The perpetrators are the ones who are committing fraud. And again, in our nation, the prevalence of common names, it's mostly prevalent among voters of color. You have a history of slavery. Black, brown, Washington, Jefferson, Washington. Now, I have an entire film I've made out of this investigation, or article called "The Best Democracy Money Can Buy." It is a plug for the film because I want you to be unstupid about this matter and how we went about this investigation. But one of the big things is you get to see the experts too come on and say, if your name is Jose or Joe Garcia, you are probably suspected of voting in 27 states. There are 836,000 people named Garcia in America. So people lost their right to vote because they had a common name and they didn't return a postcard. That's how they lost their right to vote. And that's how we may have lost the president voted for by the American people in Michigan and Pennsylvania in particular, where especially in Michigan, the number of Crosscheck Purge names of minority voters overwhelmed the plurality of Mr. Trump. So we are going now, after this, to the Department of Justice. We arranged for them to receive these petitions. These are just the 30,000, or close to 30,000 from the Asian American group, 18 Million Rising. So I'd like to invite up right now, the group has asked Samira Khan to speak for the group. They've written a statement that she'd like to read on their, they'd like her to read on their behalf, and she also has her own comments. I'm just pulling up this thing for you. And so this is Samira Khan, who is also, by the way, known as Miss New Jersey USA. Until for 2015, until about a month ago. And she's going to be going to the Justice Department for 18 Million Rising to present these petitions. Thank you. Samira Khan, that's K-H-A-N-S-A-N-E-E-R-A, Samira Khan.
A very common last name, by the way, in the Asian American community.
By the way, if you're interested, when you want that, let me know.
Sure. So, how are you this fine morning? Everyone's good? As an American, on behalf of the 28,842 members of 18millionrising.org and Daily Kos, who signed this petition, we request the Department of Justice to investigate the Interstate Crosscheck Program. The Interstate Crosscheck Program, claiming to prevent voter fraud, matches registered voters with the same first and last name across multiple states without matching middle names, suffixes, or social security numbers. We are concerned that the voting rights of communities of color, specifically Black, Latino, and Asian American communities, have been suppressed due to disproportionate voter registration purges under this program. Over 7 million voters may have been wrongly tagged and listed as registered or voting in multiple states since 2005. And while Interstate Crosscheck claims to address voter fraud, no disenrolled voters have been charged. For many Asian Americans, like myself, across a diversity of ethnic communities, it's extremely common to have the same first and last name. Many Chinese Americans, for example, may have a first name that is also a family name and a middle name that is their first name. Therefore, a brother and sister who live in different states may be regarded as having the same name under interstate crosscheck. When the program tags us by just our first and last names without checking additional information to verify identities or understanding our cultural context, it disenfranchises our communities. It's crucial that a multicultural democracy ensures the right of all citizens to vote. Interstate crosscheck disproportionately impacts participation for no reason other than our ethnicity. We at 18millionrising.org and Daily Kos, along with our 28,842 members, call for the Department of Justice to investigate the Interstate Crosscheck program immediately. So that's a statement. Now I'm going to talk to you about Asian American voters. We make up about 6% of the total population in America, about 18 million people. We're the fastest growing racial group in the United States, and only 55% of us are actually registered to vote. Not one Asian American has been charged with double voting, yet the list accuses an astonishing 1 in 8 Asian Americans of voting or registering in 2 states. For somebody like me, who is already underrepresented as an Asian American and with a very common last name, Khan, it's one of the most common last names in South Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. This could happen very easily to me. You know, it could happen to my family, and it's very close to my heart. And I you know, in regards to your question earlier, I think that there's a higher chance of us getting somewhere investigating crosscheck rather than you know, investigating a foreign government interfering in elections, because there's legitimate evidence here. The CIA hasn't released evidence on that, and I definitely think that we should move forward with this, and I encourage other communities of color as well to join us in our fight to take back our democracy.
Thank you, Samir. So hold off some questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, like this.
Oh wait, you
Right
wanted
here.
to mention this.
So Muhammad, in Muslim American communities, is obviously, it's the most popular first name in the world. So there are a lot of people with, you know, so there's a gentleman from Georgia, Muhammad Awais Muhammad. And then in Ohio, Muhammad Rashid Muhammad. And, yeah, and these people would be purged of their votes. What is it, you think 1.1 million voters were purged in 2016 election?
Yeah.
That's insane. That could change everything if this is investigated and proven. It could change everything. It's just, you know, after coming back from Standing Rock and looking into Crosscheck, it's just amazing how, I mean, not amazing, it's disappointing how, you know, our country has changed in the past few decades. You know, we're seeing overt corruption, and sometimes we feel powerless. But this way, we have power in numbers, right? People hold the power theoretically. You know, the government is employed by the people. We hold the power, so we can actually do something about it in mass numbers, of course. You know, they are nothing without the people, without us. It's very, very, as I said before, depressing to see our democracy just taken from us And, you know, we are told, ever since I was little, I was always told that, you know, my parents came here for freedom, for equal rights, for voting rights. And look, my voting rights are being taken away, and maybe not mine per se, but others. And it could possibly happen to me one day. And it's very dear to my heart, and I hope that we can all stand together and stand with communities of color and prevent this from happening. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Sarah. And if I could bring up, we have very pleased to have with us Barbara Arnwine, the president and founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Did we just see? Oh, there she is. Sorry, looking past you. Barbara Arnwine from the president and founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition, and Barbara, of course, is universally, except maybe Chris Kobach, universally recognized as the nation's top voting rights attorney. Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. First of all, I wanted to start by thanking Greg Palast for his unrelenting crusade to expose Crosscheck. Crosscheck is a horrifically terrible program designed for no other purpose than to deny legitimate voters of color their right to vote. It is a program that should not be with us today, because back in 2000, when I was at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, an organization that I headed for 26 years, we sued the state of Florida in what was known as NAACP versus Harris after the 2000 election, because doing a investigation of what happened to black voters in Florida, we had a hearing in Miami immediately after the election, and we were shocked to hear testimony from people who were denied the right to vote because their names were similar. And we talked to a veteran who was a James Johnson, I'm just using that as an example, who was denied the right to vote even though he had voted for 50 years in his district. He was denied because another gentleman in another county had the name of Jimmy Johnson. And Jimmy and James were treated as the same person. And they both were denied the right to vote. As we investigated this problem, we found out there were tens of thousands of people who had been mismatched in their names, including women with men. Women who had similar names to men, and we discovered that this made zero sense. As we got into the trial, it was revealed that the agency that had been hired, the company that had been hired to actually do the matching, had told the state of Florida, told Patricia Harris, that there were mismatches because the criteria they were using was overbroad, and had requested the right to narrow the criteria so that they would not mismatch. And they were told no, to use the overly broad matching criteria. We have known since we settled this case back in the early 2000s that this kind of a system was illegal and made zero sense. That all you had to do in order to eliminate the problems of cross-checking was to use Social Security numbers, because nobody has an identical Social Security number. And all you had to do was use birth dates. And if you use a combination of birth dates and Social Security numbers, you would knock out most of the mismatching. However, as we see with the cross-check list, we saw in Florida, they deliberately did not attempt to narrow the criteria to make sure they were protecting the rights of legitimate voters. Think about this. As Greg said, in the African American community, there are 20 prominent surnames. My uncle was named, I kid you not, his first name was General, his last name was Washington. And he was called General Washington. And he was actually written up in the Los Angeles Times a couple of times because he was a notorious driver, and he would get into trouble all the time. And his name was General Washington. My last name is Arnwine, Arnwine. That's a rare name, right? You don't see Arnwines everywhere you go. Yet, there are in this country, at the last time I checked, which was years ago, there were 3 Barbara Arnwines, 2 of whom are white. And I'm the black one. And it is undoubtedly these kinds of confusions, but if you took our Social Security number and you took our age, you would know that we weren't the same woman. And I, in fact, had to deal with this with a credit bureau that thought I was one of the other women. And had to clarify for them that all they had to do was look at the Social Security number. So sloppy work leads to that. Jackson, Johnson, when African Americans were freed from slavery, they took the name of the son of Jackson, the son of Johnson. That's how you get Johnson and Jackson, because Jackson was a heroic, mythical character who would defy slave owners, and he was always able to do something to infuriate a slave owner and get away with it, and to defy a slave owner and get away with it. He was a mythical, powerful character. And without question, when Africans were freed from slavery, they started taking on the son of Jack and the son of John to adopt those names. So we know that these are our realities. I think that it is absolutely inexcusable, and it's probably what you would call intentional and purposeful discrimination, racial discrimination in voting, for Crosscheck to exist. Because it is an overly broad program. It is over-inclusive in violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. It has clear racially discriminatory impact, and it is avoidable. It is, if done appropriately, none of this would be an issue. Also, it's illogical. If you want to put your thumbs on the scale and to, quote, steal an election, you don't do it by trying to drive across different states to vote, because there's only one person. And if you got 1,000 people to do it, it's not enough. You know, most elections are determined by over 2,000 votes. It is an illogical way of, quote, trying to, quote, steal an election. Instead, the way that you steal an election is by blocking legitimate voters from voting. What is tragic about 2016, the story that no one wants to tell, is the story of the voters who have been denied the right to vote and who were blocked, the legitimate voters who were blocked from voting, either by Crosscheck, which is a horrendous obstacle to millions of voters, but also by the reduction of polling sites. We had 868 less polling sites just in the southern states than we had in 2012. 868 less polling sites. We saw, tremendous long lines, machine failures, because they, quote, sent the worst machines to the black communities or to other communities of color. We saw tragedy in Arizona, and we saw tragedies in, as been described, in Detroit and in Milwaukee, where they used the voter ID system. The reality is that our democracy is in trouble. It's under threat. It has to be restored. As a result of all of these machinations, tomorrow here at the Press Club, beginning at 9:45 in the morning, the Voting Rights Alliance, which I helped to head up, an alliance of 18 organizations, including the Hip Hop Caucus, including the National Organization for Women, Moms Rising, Color of Change, the Transformative Justice Coalition, which I head up, the National Election Defense Coalition, and many other organizations, will convene here at the National Press Club for what we call the People's Democracy Conference. We will be here from 9:45 until 3:15, and at 3:15 we will march on the Trump transition team headquarters. And we are meeting not to have a pity party, to decry, what has happened in this election, but to talk about how we win, how we defeat voter suppression, how we defeat Crosscheck, how we strategize to defeat and get rid of all these white supremacists who have been nominated to office by President-elect Trump. And we're going to also expose the records of people like Chris Kobach, who, by the way, my organization sued successfully all the way to the Supreme Court and back, and sued this year, even though I was no longer at the Lawyers Committee, sued again, and he lost every one of these cases for trying to block legitimate Native American, Latino Americans, and African Americans from the right to vote by using, quote, proof of citizenship laws, imposing them on the federal voter registration form, when of course that's illegal. But I do want to point out that Chris Kobach is advising the Trump team at this time. Kenneth Blackwell, who you've seen on national TV, is also a known voter suppressor. He was sued in 2004 by the Lawyers Committee, again for illegally discriminating against African American voters in the provision of machines, provision of voting sites, all kinds of other violations. So I want to end by saying, Samira Khan, I join you. And 18 million rising in this fight. We are united in our commitment to having an open and unfettered right to vote, an open and inclusive democracy, and making sure that all Americans are able to exercise their right to vote without states imposing illegal and discriminatory barriers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, again, this is Greg Palast, Rolling Stone, and she did remind me, Barbara did remind me of the 2000 election. I know all about that.
And they've known since 2000.
The names removed, because I was the reporter with The Guardian and BBC that uncovered the racist list. And it was not just matching names, but it was matching people and calling them felons. Someone named James Brown in Ohio was convicted of a felony in 1942. So James Brown in Florida, or 16 James Browns in Florida, lost their vote as felons, including, if you see the film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, we have a cartoon, the guy that did Who Framed Roger Rabbit, that made cartoons of it, because you gotta laugh, it's so grim, sometimes you have to laugh. But you also meet Willie Steen, a young man, Gulf War veteran, worked in a hospital. He was turned away from the vote from the booth because he was called a felon, because he matched a Willie Osteen. from another state. And Willie Steen had his 5-year-old son with him. He's showing how wonderful American democracy was. And he said, sorry, you can't vote. You're a criminal. You're a felon. He says, I never got a traffic ticket. And his kid's looking at him like, what'd you do, Dad? Welcome to the next America. Chris Kobach just met with Donald Trump, and he, I think, deliberately let the press see that he was the memo he was carrying on national security and homeland security issues, including a plan to amend the National Voter Registration Act, the Motor Voter Law. And we know what he wants to do because he said it in court. He said it in opposition to Barbara Arnwine, where he lost, so he wants to change the law.
Right.
To say you have to prove you're a citizen. Go ahead. Where's your original your original birth certificate, etc. And by the way, in the film we also have, when you talk about mismatching the genitals, there's a country singer that we have in our film. We confront him for having voted in 14 states. He does live in a bus with a lot of state stickers, so he can actually do it. A guy named Willie Nelson, who was accused, and by the way, it's not made up for the film. It's real. He's on the list. Willie Nelson is accused of voting a second time as Willie Mae Nelson of Mississippi, an African American woman.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the other thing in America. It'll be very dangerous for. I just want to warn white people: if you have an African American sounding name, you might want to consider changing it because you are going to have a tough time voting. And so with interstate cross-check. So once again, and I was just, Samira Khan was reading you from the cross-check list of literally in Columbus, Ohio alone, I had 24 people accused of double voting by Mr. Kobach and the Republican Secretary of State of Ohio. 24 people in Columbus, all named Mohammed, but none of them had the same middle name. It's the most common name on this planet. So I'd like to now bring up civil rights legend from Spirit House, Ruby Sales.
I should have been prepared.
You've been preparing your whole life, Ruby.
Take back our democracy.
Oops. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I too would like to thank Greg very much for providing us an opportunity to discuss an issue that goes to the very heart of the question of a participatory democracy and who has the right to participate. I come here this morning representing a group of women called Sisters in Struggle, who are a part of a network of the Spirit House Project. We are writers, we are theologians, we are activists, we are practitioners, we are workers, and we are youth. And we have not done the kind of research on our role in all of this is to look at the historical trail of why we are dealing with these issues today. And we believe that the burden of proof does not lie on African Americans or other people of color. That given the long history of voting as a contested territory in this country that is inextricably tied into systemic white supremacy, we believe that states and the federal government must be the ones to defend their actions. We think it's important to gather the data, but we also think that it's important to have a conversation that has a social and historical context. Toward that end, I'd like to just go back a little bit, because this question of the suppression of black votes or black voting, whether it's with voters ID, whether it's with voter intimidation, all of these issues that we see have deep roots in the American soul. Before I go on, I think it's important to say that I am a survivor. I am a survivor of an attempted murder in Lowndes County, Alabama, where a white seminarian saved my life. We were both students in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And believe it or not, we were working on one person, one vote. 50 years ago, black people in the South, particularly in the Black Belt South, where the majority of people who live there are black people. 50 years ago, we were dealing with these very same issues. The only difference is the rationale. During the Civil Rights Movement, the argument was that black people were illiterate, we were naturally inferior, and we were incapable of grasping the complexities of what it meant to be a citizen. And therefore, because of our natural inferiority, we posed a clear and present danger to the operations of a democracy. And therefore, you had literacy tests, all kinds of ways through these avenues of inferiority to bar black people from voting. Now, you must understand that the way that this happens is that there's a correlation between the stereotypes and the beliefs that people hold in the public square about who African Americans are. It's really important, as we think about this question this morning, to understand that when black men obtained the right to vote after enslavement, during Black Reconstruction, which was one of the highest moments of participatory democracy for African Americans in this country, white people began to organize to suppress the black vote. It was a coalition of white politicians called the Redeemers, ordinary white people, educators, evangelicals, does this sound familiar? Coming together to redeem the white supremacist structure of the South that had been momentarily destabilized by Black Reconstruction and the federal government assuming power in the southern states. So from 1868 all the way up to 1900, you had what's called the massacres of black communities from New Orleans, Memphis, Tennessee, Colfax, Louisiana, where black people, New Orleans, where black people were literally set upon, murdered, burned, tortured over the question of the vote. New Orleans and Memphis are one of the most studied massacres in this country. So that when we get into this conversation about the right to vote and the obstructionist processes that interfere and suppress black votes, we must have a conversation that brings to the forefront the question of race. We cannot continue to act as if we are in a post-racial America, that suddenly the government has become corrupt, that suddenly our democracy is at stake, There was no democracy for black people when I was in the civil rights movement. We were upbuilding democracy by asserting our right to vote. So when we get into defensive postures of defending our actions without the historical trajectory, then we constantly find ourselves like the myth of Sisyphus, going up the road, and taking the ball so far, dropping it, and having to start all over again. We must begin to systematically raise the question once and for all about who is, because at the heart of voter suppression are two assumptions: that black and brown people are unfit to participate in democracy, and secondly, that this is a white person's country and only white people have the right to decide the direction of democracy. But once and for all, we must solve the racial issue in the question of voting rights. It's not by accident that these machines were broken in the black community. It's not engaging in a conspiracy theory when you make the connection between racism, racial profiling at the polls, the criminalization of black voters, because that's what's happening now. Black voters are being criminalized, being presented as people who are inherently criminals, immoral, cheats, who must be, and that America must be protected against these barbarians at the gates of a democracy. So I think it's really important as Greg unfolds for us the strategies of cross-checking and other means of suppressing the black vote, that we began to present our cases within a historical context and a long trajectory that shows that the history, the political and electoral history of this country is littered with cases of voter suppression, not only among African Americans, because all the Native Americans were the indigenous people in this country. They could not vote. Only white people could vote. And up until Andrew Jackson, only a certain kind of white man could vote. So voting goes to the very heart of who's in charge of this country. Our coalition of women, we call ourselves the mighty cloud of gray-haired witnesses. We come from a generation that put everything on the line in the fight for one person, one vote. We lost our scholarships, we lost our jobs, we were tortured in Southern jails, we were murdered, we lost our land in this great struggle for the right to vote. And given all of what we put into that process, we, a mighty cloud of gray-haired witnesses, claim the moral authority to raise the question of the right to vote in this country and to call the nation to a level of accountability. I want that to sink in a little bit. To call the nation to a level of accountability, for it's more than, because I want to add in Latinos too, is more than 80 million voters. We will be having a press conference on Thursday where women, diverse groups of women from all stations in life will come before the nation, and we will present our case as to why this election should not be recognized as a legitimate election. We also, as women, and particularly as black women, we want to make the claim that to dismiss, not count, to suppress our votes is nothing short of nothing less than a war on black women. That's important because the preponderance of women who voted were black women, are black women. The other point that we want to make that I think is very, very important is that we do not want to say that Donald Trump won the election, because to say that is to give credibility and the legitimization to a system that predicates itself on racial profiling and voter suppression. So that will be our challenge. After we leave here, we will head to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we call ourselves the Folding Chair Brigade, because we're going to sit 50 yards from the Liberty Bell, and some of our members are 85 years old, so that's why we have to sit. And we're going to raise questions and present our case before the nation, not only in terms of the strategies that were used to disenfranchise black voters and Latino voters and Muslim voters, who are also black and brown, by the way. We're going to nail, and we probably won't be able to do it, on Constitution Hall, a treatise, a 15-point treatise about why we believe that Donald Trump and this election should not be recognized as legitimate. We want to provoke this country into showing its true colors. We want the nation to come face to face with a generation of gray-haired women who put our lives on the line for a democracy that many white men want to undermine. And so we will gather, we will sit, and our younger sisters will stand all day from different organizations reading their statements about why they believe that Donald Trump should not be installed as the 45th President of the United States. We call ourselves Fighting 50 because we are a delegation more than a million-woman march. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Ruby, one of the great heroes. By the way, when she said that there was a murder attempt on her, yes, there was an assassin who attempted to, on courthouse steps,
Yes.
after she
No, on the steps of a grocery store.
Steps of a
We were
grocery
going
store.
to get sodas after being in jail for
after
7
being in
days.
jail, so the assassin pulled out his gun to shoot Ruby, and this young seminarian pushed her out of the way. He took the bullet and died.
And the state hid this murder under the cover of the law. because the person who shot him was a deputy sheriff.
I should mention, at our last, I'll be quick, and we have one last quick thoughts from Dr. Wilmer Leon coming up in a second, but then we'll answer more questions. I do want to make sure that any of you here don't miss the discussion tomorrow, starting at 9:45 here, that Barbara Ardeline mentioned. It's really important. It's a kind of rump congressional and activist hearing because there's no, because Congress is not in session. So we'll have some congressmen and congresswomen there, but it will be informal. I'll be there as well to cover.
And to testify.
And I've been asked to testify too.
That's right.
But okay, we each
Along
must
with
testify.
along with a lot of others, yes.
Very important. And I just want to mention when Ruby says that this is an old story, when you hear Donald Trump talk about millions of illegal, of in effect, black people voting twice. And so you have to have this cross-check system to hunt them down and remove them. The charge that black people vote multiple times did not begin with Donald Trump.
No.
It, in fact, 101 years ago, the Ku Klux Klan propaganda film, Birth of a Nation,
There you go.
had white actors in blackface, and you'll see this clip actually in my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. They had white actors in blackface sneaking an extra vote into a ballot box. So when you hear Donald Trump or Chris Kobach talk about multiple voters, he's just channeling, consciously or unconsciously, an old Ku Klux Klan line. He didn't invent it. Nothing's new.
Could I just add something? The other dynamic that's really essentially important to this is that black people who wore the military uniform in this country all the way back to Woodrow Wilson, who made the World War I about making the world safe for democracy, could not vote at home. The same thing for World War II. My father fought in the Korean War. He was the chaplain in the Korean War. And we lived in Fort Benning, Georgia, and he could not vote. The same thing is present today with black people and brown people who are in uniform in different parts of the world will most likely be victims of voter suppression if they come home. That's another issue that we must begin to really call the question on. What does it mean to have people to put their lives on the line for the interests of this country in places in the world where we claim to be promoting democracy when they cannot enjoy the fruits of democracy in their own land that they represent?
Thank you. I'd like to, in a minute, bring up Wilbert Leon. If you just tuned in on the Facebook Live, this is just part of the stack of 30-some thousand signatures we're taking to the Justice Department right after this. 18 Million Rising, Samira Khan is the spokeswoman today for the organization to investigate for the Justice Department to investigate interstate cross-check. Second request after Congressman Alcee Hastings of the Congressional Black Caucus had asked for this investigation. So what he thought we needed was a little bit of interest from the public, and he's got it 50,000 signatures now as of today. And I would just like to bring up now Dr. Wilmer Leon, Howard University, political scientist and author of, what is the name of this great book?
Politics, Another Perspective.
Politics, Another Perspective, and also well known as the host on XM, Sirius XM Radio, Dr. Leon.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let me first say I'm a political scientist, not a political operative. And I say that because there were a couple posts on the Facebook Live post that said, basically, if Hillary Clinton did not bring this up during the primary election, then she can't complain about the election being stolen from her now. And this has nothing to do with the election being stolen from Hillary Clinton.
Right.
This has everything to do with the election being stolen from the American people.
Well,
Yes.
Thomas Jefferson believed that all men possess certain natural or fundamental rights, rights which all men and individuals are born with, rights that cannot be taken away. Each of the natural rights emphasized a facet of what makes a human human. Quote, to secure that these natural rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The process that we in this country have instituted that enables the government to exercise its power is the vote, suffrage, the political franchise. In the African American community, we are very sensitive to the vote, to the political franchise, because of the torturous and bloody history that reflects the struggles and the battles that have been fought in order to secure our right to vote. One person, one vote is the cornerstone of Jeffersonian democracy. Implicit in this ideal of one person, one vote is the assumption that if a person casts a vote, that such vote will in fact be counted. After all, what good is it? What sense does it make? Why would a citizen take the time from their day, from their busy day, to cast a vote if that vote is not going to be recognized or going to be counted? Why would Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer risk her livelihood, her life, and the security of her family to secure a franchise if the vote that she risked her life for would not be counted? Why would Ms. Ruby Sales, Ms. Annie Pearl Avery, Mrs. Doreen Ladner, Willie Ricks, and so many others in SNCC and other organizations risk their lives during those long, hot days, those dark, lonely nights on those hate-filled, treacherous back roads in Alabama and in Mississippi, convincing sharecroppers and other oppressed African Americans that it's worth the risk for them to register and then go vote if their vote was not going to be counted. One person, one vote is the ideal that America has used time and time again as a philosophical weapon against enemies and the rationale for undermining, if not overthrowing, tyrants, dictators, and evil heads of foreign governments. So with this premise being clear, and I challenge anyone listening to challenge the accuracy of this premise, I have three questions. First, in the context of this recent 2016 presidential election, with the irrefutable evidence that is presented by Greg Palast, why is the Republican Party the party of voter suppression and election fraud? I haven't heard anybody on mainstream media asking that fundamental question. Second, why is the Democratic Party so conspicuously silent and so reluctant to use the irrefutable evidence that has been presented to challenge these crimes and pursue these criminals? They should be fighting to the death to protect the rights and count the ballots of every citizen who cast a ballot. Third, why has most of mainstream media failed to do half of the investigative reporting that Greg Palast has done on these issues? Why is the Fourth Estate allowing this fraud to be perpetrated upon the American voter? Ensuring that every cast vote is counted should be the fundamental focus of every Secretary of State in this country, regardless of party affiliation. Every vote that was cast in the 2016 election should be counted, and the election should not be certified until they are. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. If every vote is not counted, due to the fact that subversive tactics were employed, to ensure that they would not be, then the powers that President Trump will derive and exercise will not be just, because the consent of the governed will not have been granted. If one person, one vote is supposed to be the cornerstone of democracy, then those who engage in the acts of subverting it are un-American. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leon. Wow. Okay, so again, I want to remind you about tomorrow here at the press club starting at 9:45. And sure, I mean, we're going to ask, anyone can answer any of the questions if there are any quick to throw out or among each other, and to anyone. And again, watch for our report unboxing out tomorrow on the on-ground investigation on the Crosscheck and what happened, the real story of Michigan and the swing states. And then we're going to rush over, because we're running a little late on them, on the Department of Justice, to hand them what I hope they're ready to receive with open arms, and hope that they will now see the reason